Love is great. Love is when we search often for that person that we feel is going to complete us, right? When we hear this reading from 1 Corinthians 13, we can't help but think about weddings. I think I've heard this reading more at weddings than I ever have heard on a Sunday morning. In January, Amazon released a short movie, just over an hour, called What Love Looks Like. It opens with a series of scenes, a series of couples who are obviously in that first stage of love, that intoxicating stage of phase of love. And after the series of couples is introduced in the movie, the scene changes. Things become a little more mundane in their relationship, less romantic. They sit on the couch and don't talk to each other. They want to do different things. They begin to struggle with their relationship. And then it changes all over again, and there's new couples introduced. Couples who are struggling to even find a way to introduce themselves to each other. Couples who turn to their friends for help in meeting the right person. And of course, one guy who's struggling to meet this woman that he's met in a park. He decides in his second text that he's ever going to send this woman to send the words, "Will you marry me?" Probably not the best second text that you could ever send someone that you're interested in. But he's so wrapped up in his emotional state that he's jumping into a moment. We do that. We do that when we're overwhelmed. And love can be like that. When we feel somewhat incomplete and we're searching for the person who will make us whole, we can jump in. But our sermon started with the slide saying, "Be love." That's different than being in love. And as much as we know that the love at the beginning of a relationship, and even the love shown at a wedding, is intense, we also realize that over time, that love changes. Early in a relationship, love is expressed through actions. The things that a couple does for each other. The meals that are shared. The food that is prepared. The trips that are made out. The things that are done to make each other feel better and special and loved. It doesn't take long, just like in the movie, for things to become more mundane. And if you had this reading at a wedding, you might come back to it and think that maybe there's a way that we can recapture that moment of love if we just went back to this reading. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. In those more mundane moments of a relationship, we figure if we can just bear things out, then our hope of recapturing that love will come back. Is that what Paul was really trying to get at, though? Was Paul trying to give the church in Corinth a way to express romantic love? Was he trying to give people a way that they could be together as a couple? One of the commentaries that I read, this Feasting on the Word commentary, would put it this way about Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians 13. Read outside the context of Paul's entire letter, it might seem that love is simply the foremost in a list of virtues. Yet another talent one might try to perfect. But read within the context of this letter, this love is a state of being. That puts a whole new level on things. It's not a description of action or of virtues, but a state of being. If you thought being patient, kind, not envious, boastful, arrogant, or rude, irritable, resentful, if you thought doing those things was hard, because it is, being love is even harder. We know that we need to be love. But it's hard at times to change our state of being. How do we become love? Well, Jesus was once asked what the most important commandment was. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. That is how we become love. But again, our world is so tied up in actions of what we think shows love. And it's really hard at this point in time with physical distancing, even as restrictions are released a little bit. How do we show the world that we are love at the core of our being? Well, Jesus, in that reading from Matthew, was actually quoting Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy says this, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children, and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." Keeping love with us all the time, teaching children about love, talking about love when we're at home or away, thinking about love when we go to sleep and when we get up, writing about love on our hands and our foreheads, putting them at our door so that we see them when we go out and when we come back in. If we do all of that, it can't help but change us. Change us to our very core. Help us become love. Yes, we will still want actions to show it. But the important thing is to be love within ourselves so that we know whether we're with someone or apart from them, that we are still love. It does make it harder at this time for us to show love to the world. Certainly with the blessing box that we have, that's one way. With the prayers that we've offered and received, that's another way. But still, part of us wants to do more. It says in the reading from 1 Corinthians that we see dimly. And at times we do see dimly. Quite frankly, Jesus taught in parables, and I often think that it was a bit dim that the disciples understood his teachings and parables. They didn't always get it. They didn't see clearly. They didn't really understand what he was talking about. But at some point we will see clearly. We will understand how to be love at our very core. At some point, we will come face to face with God. Coming face to face with love. Coming face to face with God. When we see the face of another, we begin to be able to pick out their unique and identifying characteristics, to know what makes them them. What makes God God? Love. For in seeing God's face, we begin to know what love really is. God is love. From the beginning of time through now and until the end of time, God is love. And we rejoice that we are unique and loved in God's eyes. May we rejoice in our own uniqueness and our own identifying characteristics and traits. May we rejoice in our journey and our ability to be love in the world. For our God is love, and for that we give thanks. Amen.